As a priest, I am blessed to share in some incredible experiences of transformation in people's lives. I think of a couple on their wedding day just beaming with love as they share their vows. Or the parent of a high-risk pregnancy finally holding their newborn child in their arms. They're in awe of the miracle of new life. Or the person in confession, freed from a heavy sin, just glowing with joy, the burden lifted. Or the person near death, radiating peace as they converse with their loved ones who have died. A reminder of just how thin the veil is between this life and the next. These are all expressions of transfiguration, all expressions of God's glory revealed. The gift of the transfiguration of Jesus is a wonderful mystery. In that experience, the human Jesus received the assurance of the Father's love as he said, "You are my beloved Son." It revealed as well the divine Jesus to the apostles, saying the Father and the Son are indeed one. In time, the disciples will understand that the passion and death of Jesus were all part of God's plan of salvation. While reflecting upon the transfiguration of Jesus, Bishop Robert Barron noted, he said, "If Jesus is only divine, then he doesn't touch us. He's just out there someplace. And if Jesus is only human, then he cannot save us." The transfiguration of Jesus reminds us that both natures of Jesus are intricately bound together in God's plan of salvation. For all of us, the transfiguration reveals God's dream for humility, that we as humanity are glory-bound. The eyes of the apostles were opened so they could see Jesus in his divine nature. Their ears were open to recognize the voice of the Father say, "This is my beloved Son," that same voice they heard deep in their hearts when Jesus called the disciples to follow him. Jesus seeks to transform our lives through his merciful love so that we in turn can transform the world. The way of the world says, "It's all about number one, it's all about me." This thinking does not reflect the light of Christ. Rather, it is part of the devil's plan to pit us against one another, to create divisions wherever possible. Jesus taught us to put others before ourselves. Faithful husbands and wives put their spouses before themselves. Faithful parents put their children before themselves. Faithful citizens put the marginalized and lost before themselves. This is how we make the presence of Christ real in the world and how we experience transfiguration. But we all know that being a faithful person is not an easy path to walk. Consider the faith of Abraham. He listened to God's call to leave his homeland and to find a new home, to let go of everything that was familiar to him and to start over. He listened to the Lord's call. And after many years of waiting, Abraham and Sarah conceived a son, Isaac. Now Abraham hears God asking him to sacrifice his son, his dream, his promise. And let's not forget about the faith of Isaac. He was asked to carry the wood of the sacrifice on his own back as he went up the mountain. He trusted his father unconditionally. Historically, we know that the practice of human sacrifice to the gods was a common experience among the Canaanites during the time of Abraham. What is unusual is that the one true God sees the depth of Abraham's faith and he stops the sacrifice. He allows Isaac to live. We see in this story the journey that Jesus will make as he freely carries the wood of the cross on his shoulders up Golgotha to be crucified. God the Father allows his beloved Son to be crucified for the salvation of the world. Thankfully, death does not have the last word. Christ is raised in glory, which is what the Transfiguration reveals to us. And on that day of the Transfiguration, what a special experience it must have been for Moses and Elijah to be with Jesus. They spent their lives preparing for the promised Messiah, and that promise was now fulfilled. In the moment of the Transfiguration, the apostles were confronted with their own imperfections, their own sinfulness, and they were fearful of being in the presence of God the Almighty. Soon, though, this experience of fear and wonder became a glimpse of what will be in the glory of God's kingdom. This vision would be a gift for them when the shadow of the cross entered their own lives. Even though they still had a lot of growing to do, over time the disciples were becoming more and more committed to Jesus. They would become more and more like Jesus. Each Sunday when we gather for Mass, for the Eucharist, we experience a vision of heaven. We, though many, are united in one voice of prayer and praise to our God. We are inspired by God's living word, and we are nourished with true food from heaven. Through these experiences, as we gather for the Mass, we are being transformed more and more into the image and likeness of Christ. Experiences of transfiguration help us to see what is beyond the here and now to what will be our eternal share in Christ's risen life.